You ever have that sinking feeling in the pit of your stomach, like you're missing something obvious but can't quite put your finger on it? That's been me for the last few months. I'm Landon Meyers, your average guy from a small coastal town in Maine. I'm quiet, I keep to myself, and I've been married to Eddie, short for Edeline, for 12 years now. Well, married might not be the right word anymore. More like cohabitating with a stranger who occasionally throws sarcastic comments my way when she isn't glued to her phone. At first, I chalked up her weird behavior to stress. Maybe work was getting to her. Maybe she just needed some space. But as the weeks passed, her once warm and affectionate nature was replaced with icy indifference. She'd disappear for hours, return late, and brush off my attempts at conversation with a casual, "Don't worry about it." And the physical intimacy? Forget it. I couldn't remember the last time she even touched me, let alone smiled at me. But what really gnawed at me wasn't just the absence of affection. It was the sense that Eddie was hiding something. I'm no detective, but when someone who used to be all about movie nights and Sunday breakfast suddenly can't stand to be in the same room as you, something's off. It started small, late-night texts, whispered phone calls, and vague excuses about staying late at work. But the turning point came one evening when she stayed out until midnight without so much as a text. I had been pacing the living room, trying to figure out what to say when she finally walked through the door. She just looked at me, her eyes half-lidded and tired, and muttered, "What are you still doing up?" No apology, no explanation. That's when it hit me like a gut punch. Maybe Eddie was cheating on me. Now, I'm not the type to jump to conclusions. I like to think of myself as a rational guy. But how else do you explain the growing distance, the secrecy, and the complete lack of any physical connection? It wasn't just the late nights. It was the way she avoided eye contact, the way she stiffened whenever I tried to touch her shoulder, the way her phone was always face down on the table, locked tighter than a bank vault. I tried to confront her. I really did. But every time, she either laughed it off or threw some biting comment my way, like I was the crazy one for even asking. "Landon, you're paranoid," she'd say with that smirk I used to find cute but now made my blood boil. "You need to stop worrying so much." And maybe I would have believed her if not for one simple question that kept bouncing around in my head. If she's so miserable, why hasn't she left yet? What kept her here, in this house, with me? She didn't need me. She had a good job, plenty of friends, none of whom I ever met, mind you, and more than enough independence. So why stay? What was she holding on to? The marriage clearly wasn't it. I couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play. Maybe Eddie wasn't just holding on to the marriage out of habit. Maybe it was the house, the one passed down to me from my late uncle. Legally mine, but I never imagined it would become a battlefield. As I sat there night after night, watching Eddie become more of a stranger, the knot in my stomach grew tighter. I knew something was coming, something I wasn't ready for. But whatever it was, I had to face it head on. Little did I know, that confrontation was closer than I thought. The days stretched on, each one more tense than the last. The house felt less like a home and more like a battleground, with Eddie and me avoiding direct confrontations as if we were negotiating an invisible truce. The problem was, I didn't even know the terms of the war yet. She acted like I wasn't even there half the time, like some background noise she could mute when it suited her. I started noticing patterns, though. That phone of hers was practically attached to her hand. Always face down, always locked, and always buzzing late at night. One night, curiosity got the best of me, so I made a casual comment. "Who's texting you so late?" Eddie didn't even look up from her phone, just muttered, "Work stuff. You wouldn't understand." Now, I may not be a genius, but I know when someone's lying to me. There's no way her job as a graphic designer was blowing up her phone at midnight with urgent requests, unless fonts suddenly became a national crisis. But what could I do? Confronting her would just lead to more sarcasm and that same condescending smirk. So I let it slide for now. The late-night absences became more frequent. Sometimes she'd leave without saying a word, coming back hours later with no explanation. If I asked, she'd just roll her eyes and say, "I'm allowed to have a life outside of you, Landon." Yeah, but having a life that doesn't involve your husband? That was a new one. What really started messing with my head was how she never brought up the idea of leaving, even though it was clear she didn't want to be here anymore. I mean, any reasonable person would have called it quits by now, right? If you're that unhappy, why stay? It was like she was dangling the relationship over my head, waiting for me to crack, but never pushing far enough to break things off herself. And then there was the house. That's when I started to think maybe it wasn't about the marriage at all. Maybe Eddie wasn't just holding on for sentimental reasons. Maybe she was holding on to the house. The house that my late Uncle Ray left to me, free and clear, no mortgage. The house that he never quite seemed to love, but never wanted to leave either. One cold evening in January, as the wind howled outside and the fire crackled in the hearth, I came home to something that sent my suspicions through the roof. I walked in the door and immediately saw them, her new high heels. Not the ones I was used to seeing collecting dust in the closet, but sleek, black stilettos, shiny and out of place, sitting casually by the front door. Next to them, a black dress draped over the chair in the hallway. A new dress, one I had never seen before. I felt my pulse quicken as I stepped inside. Something was definitely wrong. I could hear Eddie upstairs in the bedroom, the faint sounds of her humming while she got ready for whatever it was she thought she was doing tonight. I made my way upstairs, my footsteps slow and deliberate. I found her at her vanity, casually applying makeup like she was getting ready for a red carpet event. She didn't even flinch when I entered the room, just kept brushing on her lipstick, a bright red that I knew wasn't for me. I leaned against the doorframe, watching her for a moment. She was wearing that new dress now, sleek and form-fitting, with a neckline lower than I had ever seen her wear. Her hair was styled in loose waves, like she'd spent hours perfecting it. There was no way this was for a casual night out with the girls. "So, where are we going tonight?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She barely glanced at me, continuing with her makeup. "We're not going anywhere, Landon," she said flatly. "Excuse me?" I felt my chest tighten. She finally turned to look at me, her face calm and composed as if she were talking about the weather. "I'm going on a date." Now, I'll admit, I expected anger to surge through me. I expected my vision to go red, my fists to clench, maybe even some yelling. But instead, I just stood there, staring at her, feeling the cold air between us like an icy wall. A date? She didn't even have the decency to hide it anymore. "When were you going to tell me about this?" I asked, my voice sounding far calmer than I felt. She smirked, that same infuriating smirk that made me want to throw something. "I just did." I could see she was waiting for me to explode, to lose my temper, so she could play the victim in all this. But I wasn't giving her that satisfaction. "And when are you planning to move out?" I asked, crossing my arms and leaning against the wall. That wiped the smirk off her face. For a split second, I saw a flicker of something, maybe doubt, maybe shock, but it was gone as quickly as it came. She put down her lipstick and crossed her arms, mimicking me. "I'm not leaving," she said matter-of-factly. "This house is mine, Landon. You're the one who's going." I couldn't help but laugh. "You really think so?" The look in her eyes shifted. She wasn't expecting me to stay this calm, and she definitely wasn't expecting the next move I had in mind. Eddie stared at me, waiting for me to back down like I usually did. But this time, I wasn't in the mood to play along. I knew the house wasn't hers, legally, and I wasn't about to let her bully me into leaving. This wasn't a rental agreement where one of us could just walk away. This was my home, my late uncle's gift to me, and I wasn't going to be kicked out of it like some unwelcome guest. "You heard me," I said, still leaning against the wall. "You're going to move out, pack your things and leave, and then you can go on as many dates as you want." Eddie's eyes narrowed, and that calm, confident mask she'd been wearing started to slip. "I don't think you understand how this works," she said slowly, like she was explaining something to a child. "This house is as much mine as it is yours, and if anyone's leaving, it's you." I stood there, stunned by how casually she rewrote reality. "Actually, no," I said, keeping my voice as steady as possible. "This house was passed down to me from my uncle, Eddie. The deed is in my name. You don't have any claim to it." For the first time that night, I saw genuine frustration in her eyes. She uncrossed her arms and stood up from her vanity, pacing across the room in those ridiculous heels. "You think you can just throw me out?" she hissed, her voice rising. "I've lived here just as long as you have. I'm not leaving, and if you try to force me out, I'll make sure you regret it." "Force you out?" I raised an eyebrow. I'm not forcing anyone to do anything. I'm giving you a choice. You want to be with someone else? Fine, go. But you're not staying here while you do it. That's when she smirked again, a cold, manipulative look that made my stomach turn. And what if I don't leave? What if I stay right here in our house and live my life the way I want? What are you going to do then, Landon? Before I could answer, she cut me off, her voice dripping with venom. And let's not forget, it doesn't take much for a woman to make certain accusations. You wouldn't want me calling the police, telling them you've been aggressive, threatening me. You know how they always believe the woman in these situations. My blood ran cold. I knew exactly what she was implying. She was threatening to accuse me of abuse. Falsely, of course, but enough to make my life hell. It was a low blow, even for her. Really? I asked, my voice calm, though my heart was pounding in my chest. You'd stoop that low? She shrugged, unbothered. I'll do what I have to, Landon. So why don't you make this easy on yourself and leave? Go stay with your buddy Marlowe or something. But I'm not going anywhere. I stood there, gripping the door frame, trying to control the anger bubbling up inside me. It was one thing to fall out of love. It was another thing entirely to pull this kind of manipulative crap. But I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. Not yet anyway. Here's the thing, Eddie, I said, stepping toward her. You're not the only one who can play games. And I think you're going to find out real soon that I'm not as easy to push around as you think. With that, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her standing there in her heels and black dress, dumbfounded. She could throw as many threats as she wanted, but I had already made my move. I had a plan, and it started in the garage. I made my way downstairs, trying to keep my cool. My heart was still racing from that little showdown, but I had to think straight. Eddie wasn't just playing games. She was playing dangerous ones. And if she thought she could force me out of the house, well, she had another thing coming. I went straight to the garage. Now, I'm no master strategist, but I knew one thing. If Eddie was hellbent on going out for this so-called date, I needed to make sure she didn't have the means to do it. I wasn't about to sit back and let her flaunt whatever affair she had going on right in front of me. Not in my house. There it was, her little red coupe, sitting all shiny and ready for her glamorous night. Too bad it wasn't going anywhere. I grabbed my toolbox and went straight for the essentials. A few quick tugs, a loosened wire or two, and her car was effectively disabled. Not permanently. I'm not a monster, but just enough to make sure she wouldn't be driving anywhere tonight. Next, I took a detour to the router. Look, I'm not some tech wizard, but even I know how to unplug a Wi-Fi router. Internet down, check. No calls, no texting her mystery date, no Uber rides. If she wanted to contact her knight in shining armor, she'd have to do it the old-fashioned way, by foot. And those heels? Not exactly made for walking. As I stood in the garage, looking at my handiwork, I almost felt a twinge of guilt. Almost. But then I remembered the way she had looked at me upstairs, so smug, so sure that she had the upper hand. Well, tonight she'd learned that I wasn't going to be pushed around. Not anymore. I went back inside, trying to act casual, as if nothing had happened. Eddie was still in the bedroom, finishing up her makeup, blissfully unaware that her grand exit was about to get a lot less grand. I poured myself a cup of coffee in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, waiting for the fireworks to start. And sure enough, about 5 minutes later, I heard the click-clack of her heels on the hardwood floor as she made her way toward the front door. She breezed into the kitchen, purse in hand, and shot me a glare. "You're still here?" she asked, her tone dripping with annoyance. "Yep," I said, taking a sip of my coffee. "Figured I'd stay home tonight. Relax." She gave me one last disdainful look before storming out to the garage. I leaned back, casually sipping my coffee, waiting for the inevitable. Not even 30 seconds later, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of a car refusing to start. There was the first attempt, then a second, then silence. I smiled into my cup. The door slammed open, and Eddie stormed back in, her face twisted with rage. "What did you do to my car?" I put my coffee down and shrugged. "Car trouble, huh? That's unfortunate." She stomped across the kitchen, glaring at me with a fury I hadn't seen before. "Don't play games with me, Landon. You did something. The car won't start." I raised an eyebrow, playing dumb. "Maybe it's the battery." You know how cold it's been lately. Kinda kills the charge. She narrowed her eyes, but before she could say anything else, she grabbed her phone out of her purse, fingers flying across the screen. Then came her second surprise of the night. She stared at the phone, her face falling. No service, she muttered under her breath, tapping at the screen in frustration. Why isn't anything working? I smiled innocently. Oh, weird. Maybe it's the Wi-Fi. I noticed it was down earlier. Strange how everything just stops working at the same time. Huh. The look she shot me could have melted ice. She was furious, but I could see the gears turning in her head. She knew I was behind it, but she had no proof, and I wasn't about to hand her any. Landon, fix it, she demanded, her voice trembling with rage. Now. I tilted my head, pretending to consider it for a moment. Or what? You're gonna call the police? Oh wait, you can't. No phone, no car, seems like you're stuck here tonight. She took a step toward me, her fists clenched. I swear to God, Landon, if you don't fix it. Or what? I cut her off, standing up straight now, my voice calm but firm. You'll make good on your little threats? Call the cops. Make up some lie about how I've been threatening you. I took a step closer to her, looking her dead in the eyes. Go ahead. Try it. But let me remind you, Eddie, I haven't laid a hand on you. I haven't threatened you. All I've done is ask you to leave my house. She froze, glaring at me with a mixture of hatred and frustration. For the first time that night, she seemed unsure. She wasn't used to me standing up to her like this. Look, I continued, softening my tone just slightly. Why don't you just stay somewhere else tonight? Give us both some space, and we'll figure this out like adults tomorrow. She didn't answer, just stood there, her jaw clenched. I could tell she wasn't done with this. Not by a long shot. Finally, she grabbed her purse, turned on her heel, and stormed out the door. I watched through the window as she marched down the driveway, heading toward the neighbor's house. I didn't have to see her face to know she was fuming. As she walked out of sight, I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the tension lift just slightly. But I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I wasn't surprised when the police car pulled up. Eddie had stormed off earlier, and I knew she'd bring back reinforcements. As I opened the door, there they were, Officers Brock Randall and Jane Kimber. Small town, small police force. I knew them both. Evening, Landon, Brock said, his tone neutral. We got a call, domestic disturbance. I shrugged, trying to appear casual. Figures. Come on in. They stepped inside, and I could see Jane scanning the place, probably expecting chaos. But the house was clean, calm, just me sipping coffee in my kitchen. I could almost feel the tension hanging in the air. Brock cleared his throat. Eddie says you've been threatening her, keeping her from leaving. I couldn't help but smirk. Threatening? No. Told her she's free to go anytime. In fact, I've been waiting for her to pack. Jane chimed in. She says you sabotaged her car and cut the internet. Car trouble and a Wi-Fi outage? Sounds like a rough night, I said deadpan. Just as I was about to wrap up the conversation, the front door flew open. There she was, Eddie in full dramatic mode. He sabotaged my car. He's dangerous, she yelled, pointing at me. Brock sighed, clearly tired of the theatrics. Eddie, we've already checked. There's no sign of any trouble. You're just going to take his side? She snapped, eyes wild with frustration. Jane stepped forward. Look, if you don't feel safe, you can stay elsewhere tonight. But from what we've seen, there's no immediate danger here. Eddie's face flushed with rage, but she knew she was losing. With one last venomous glare, she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Brock looked back at me. Just keep things calm, Landon. We don't want to be back here tonight. I nodded, watching them leave. The police were gone, but Eddie? She wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. Not even 10 minutes after the cops left. I heard it, a loud crash outside, the kind that makes your stomach drop before your brain even registers what happened. I rushed to the window, and there it was, Eddie's little red coupe smashed right into our neighbor's fence. She must have tried to drive off in her car without realizing I'd sabotaged it earlier. I stepped outside, the cold air biting at my face, but the scene in front of me was worth it. Eddie, still dressed in that black date night dress, stood there staring at the wreck. She looked ready to explode. She saw me coming, her face twisted in fury. "What did you do to my car, Landon?" she screamed. I crossed my arms, trying to hide my satisfaction. "I didn't do anything. Looks like your car couldn't handle the cold, or you're driving. You think this is funny? I'm calling the police," she yelled, pulling out her phone. Then her face fell when she remembered the Wi-Fi was down, and she couldn't call anyone. I raised an eyebrow. Good luck with that. Eddie was trapped. No phone, no car, and now she had to explain to the neighbors why their fence was destroyed. She stood there, seething, and I could practically see her mind racing, trying to figure out her next move. With one last frustrated glare, she grabbed her purse, took off those ridiculous heels, and marched down the street on foot. I watched her go, knowing she was probably heading somewhere to use a phone and get back at me. But for now, I had won this round. The next morning, I got a call from my lawyer and longtime friend, Marlo Rivers. I knew this mess was far from over, and Marlo had been helping me prepare for what was coming next. "Landon, we've got a problem," Marlo said, his voice serious. "I've been looking into things, and it seems Eddie's been using the house as collateral for some personal debts. Gambling, risky business deals, you name it." I felt my stomach drop. "Wait, how? The house is in my name." "Technically, yes, but she's been leveraging the property for loans. She's racked up quite a bit of debt. And if she gets her way in the divorce, she's going to try and drain your assets." Of course, that explained everything. Eddie wasn't just sticking around for the marriage. She was clinging to the house because it was her last financial lifeline. If she lost the house, she'd lose everything. And she'd been planning to use me as her way out, without me knowing a thing. Marlo continued, "We need to move quickly. I'm filing a claim to protect your assets, but be prepared. She's going to fight this." Suddenly, everything clicked. All those nights she'd been out late, the whispered phone calls, her refusal to leave. It was never about the relationship. It was about money. And now, she was going to come after everything I had left. But I wasn't going to let her take me down that easily. After hearing from Marlo, the pieces fell into place. Eddie had been playing a long game, using our home, our life, as collateral in her schemes. But now, armed with the truth, I wasn't just going to sit back and let her win. The divorce proceedings kicked off, and predictably, Eddie came in swinging. Her demands were ridiculous. Half the house, half of everything we owned, and even spousal support. She acted like she was the one who had been wronged, spinning stories about how I had kept her trapped, how she'd been forced to stay in the marriage. But my ace in the hole? The house deed. The property was in my name, passed down from my uncle, and Eddie had no legal claim to it. Marlo had made sure of that. When her lawyer tried to argue for the house, Marlo calmly slid the documents across the table. Eddie's face paled when she saw the deed. "This house was never hers," Marlo said, his voice firm, "and any claim to it is null. Furthermore, we have evidence of her financial mismanagement, using the house as collateral without my client's knowledge." Eddie's confident smirk vanished, replaced by shock. She tried to argue, but her lawyer knew the game was up. She couldn't take the house, and she was in no position to demand anything else. In the end, she was left with nothing but her debts and the wreckage of her failed schemes. The judge ruled in my favor, and I walked out of that courtroom a free man. No house to lose, no money to split. But the best part? Eddie's grip on me, on my life, was finally broken. A year passed since the chaos of my divorce, and life had settled into something I hadn't expected: peace. Without Eddie's constant manipulation hanging over me, I felt like I could breathe again. The house was mine, my finances were safe, and I had finally cut her out of my life for good. One afternoon, I wandered into a small art gallery downtown, something I'd never done before. That's where I met Annie. She was nothing like Eddie. Annie was soft-spoken, yet confident, with a sincerity that caught me off guard. We struck up a conversation, and before I knew it, I was asking her to grab coffee. Unlike the cold, distant exchanges I'd grown used to with Eddie, every moment with Annie felt genuine. As we spent more time together, I realized what I had been missing all those years. Annie wasn't about drama or mind games. She was real, supportive, and had this refreshing honesty that made me start trusting again, something I thought was impossible after what I'd been through. We didn't rush things. We took it slow, savoring the small moments, walks along the beach, quiet dinners, and the comfort of simply being around someone who actually cared. It was the first time in years I felt like I was building something meaningful with someone who truly saw me. And unlike the constant tension that had filled my home with Eddie, being with Annie was easy. We weren't competing, we weren't manipulating each other. It was respect and it was mutual. I even found myself laughing more, something I hadn't done in years. My life, which had once felt like a slow descent into chaos, was now filled with new possibilities. The weight of the past was finally lifting, and for the first time, I felt like I was creating a future I could actually look forward to. The years that followed were a fresh start. I rebuilt my life, not just around the house I had fought so hard to keep, but around the relationships that truly mattered. Annie and I grew closer, and we eventually made the kind of life together that I had once thought was impossible. Real love, real trust. As for Eddie, well, I heard through the grapevine that she'd remarried, then divorced again, tangled up in more of her schemes. But that wasn't my concern anymore. I'd won my freedom, and with it, I gained something much more valuable: peace. In the end, the greatest victory wasn't keeping the house or outsmarting Eddie. It was realizing that I didn't need to fight anymore. I had my life back, and this time I wasn't going to let anyone take it away.